One of the greatest places where we can see God's passive and active aspects of his providence together is at the pinnacle of human history, the cross. In Acts 2, verses 22 through 24, we read from Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. He says this, "Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. This man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him." Here we see a number of things happening. Number one, we see God was active through Jesus in performing miracles, wonders, and signs in order to validate that Jesus was God. Number two, the death of Jesus on the cross was all a part of God's plan, God's sovereign, deliberate plan. This brings the activity of God to the forefront because Jesus, being God himself, the second person of the Trinity, he actively got off his throne in heaven and came down to earth to actively live a perfect, righteous life and to offer himself up as the only sacrifice for sinners, all as the great substitute. 3, we also see that God allowed the death of his one and only Son to happen, which happened because the natural wickedness of man drove people to kill Jesus out of their own desire of their own wicked heart. This was the greatest and most selfless act of allowing something to happen that God could ever do. And 4, we also see as Jesus lie in the tomb, God actively intervened and raised Jesus from the dead so that his work as the great substitute could be approved and so that he would be vindicated as the victorious Son of God who has had final victory over sin, death, and the enemy for those he redeemed on the cross. So after looking at these 3 instances from Scripture, as we first looked at the passive permission of God, and then in Job, and then in part 2 as we looked at the active work of God in the fiery serpents, and now in this connecting piece where we see the active and passive work of God together. If we ever struggle with why God allows certain things to happen that may seem tough for us to swallow, just take a look upon the cross. Look upon the cross where God allowed the death of the only innocent human being that has ever lived to take place. And it was that of his precious Son, no less. If he can bring good through that by allowing it to happen, he can bring about good through anything, no matter what it is, no matter what we face. He is sovereign. And his sovereign providential hand that is active and passive throughout the course of human history always, in every circumstance, runs through the filter of who God is in his very being. He is completely and equally holy, good, sovereign, just, gracious, righteous, loving, merciful, wrathful, all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful, patient, wise, supreme, unchangeable, simple, independent, selfless, and faithful all the time. And this is true about each person of the Trinity, as the Father, Son, and Spirit are co-equal and co-eternal. So until next time, when we finish this brief series on God's providence, reflect upon this truth as you live your life.